Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. The trade conflict between the United States and China has intensified, with tariff hikes and retaliatory measures sending shockwaves through global markets. China has imposed new tariffs on U.S. agricultural and livestock products, while U.S. President Trump's steel and aluminum tariffs have triggered countermeasures from Europe and Canada. At the same time, concerns about economic slowdowns in the U.S. and China are growing, with South Korea closely monitoring developments as it navigates its own trade challenges. To dive into key issues driving these trade disputes and discuss potential strategies for countries like South Korea moving forward, we invite Oh Joon-seok, Dean of Sookmyung Women's University's College of Economics and Business. Welcome.
Good evening.
And also joining us from Texas is Hwa-kyun Kim, Professor of Banking and Finance at Texas A&M University's Mays Business School. Great to have you, Professor.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's start right away with Professor Kim. So since March 10, China has imposed 10 to 15% tariffs on U.S. agricultural and livestock products. Now, this move comes as retaliation against Trump's administration's additional 10% tariff on Chinese imports last month, on top of an earlier 10% increase. Unlike the U.S., which targeted all Chinese goods, why did China focus solely on agricultural and livestock products?
Well, there could be multiple reasons, but China definitely tries to be more effectively responding to these, the initial tariffs, because China exports various types of the manufactured goods, etc., to U.S., yet the import items are more concentrated and limited. So, for instance, China probably can just buys actually a lot of the agricultural products from the U.S. So by focusing on sectors like these agricultural sectors, it can actually have pronounced impact, and also the buying power of these kind of things definitely affect the U.S. The export performance. Actually, therefore, it could be an effective measure. And at the same time, by targeting agricultural exports, China can get pressure on U.S. farmers, who is actually our significant political constituency and a big support group for the Republican Party and President Trump. So it can potentially move the needle, influencing the U.S. domestic policy, and that's probably not the one that Mr. Trump actually just wants. And also, I think the domestic economic condition, it's more like a Chinese excuse, but I think China's economic slowdown has led to reduced domestic demand for certain agricultural products. And this may probably result in supply surpluses and stuff like that. So imposing tariffs on the U.S. agricultural imports can help manage these kind of surpluses. So clearly they can actually have better excuses when they just impose tariffs. After all, it's like tax.
So they want more legitimacy. That's why they're focusing on this sector, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So with the U.S.-China tariff war escalating, Chinese Premier Li Qiang recently set the country's 2025 economic growth target at around 5% during the National People's Congress. Professor Oh, what is the rationale between this 5% target, and how could the ongoing trade war impact China's economy?
IMF has projected China's economy will grow 4.6% this year, down from 5% in 2024. 5% is very, very important from the perspective of Chinese economy. It is a kind of the holding the current trend. President Xi Jinping had already been battling persistently low consumption, property sector crisis, and unemployment before President Trump's new 10% levy on Chinese import. As we mentioned, Premier Li Qiang about to make domestic demand the main engine and anchor of economic growth in the country, which is absolutely right. Then what about inside of China? Effective demand is so weak and consumption is so sluggish. And what about unemployment? China announced recently a two-step plan for creating some 12 million new jobs in cities. China's rapidly aging population also a problem. It makes presents a fresh challenge, which has long relied on its vast workforce as a driver of economic growth. In addition, Beijing will raise its budget deficit to around 4% of its GDP. It is a very rare move that will give Beijing more room to tackle its economic slowdown. Now, outside of China, Beijing was able to meet its 5% target of economic growth for the last 2 years, and then Chinese government wants to sustain this 5% trend, but the growth was driven only by strong export, which resulted in a nearly $1 trillion surplus. It feels like so unilateral, this policy eventually the change of existing 10% U.S. tariff levy up to 20%. The higher U.S. tariff have made accordingly that 5% task more challenging because they could crimp sales. In this way, what's left is fiscal policy only. China is going to have to rely more than ever on government spending spike to achieve 5% growth. They would adopt a more proactive fiscal policy, including an increase in deficit spending of about 4% of GDP. It will be the main booster of China's economy this year.
Mm-hmm. So they would have to focus on within the country themselves. Now, at the same time, concerns about an economic slowdown in the U.S. are also mounting. There are growing warnings that Trump's tariff war could backfire, not only harming, targeted countries, but also putting the U.S. economy at risk. So with the first quarter of 2024 expected to show negative growth, 2025 rather, how do you assess its economic outlook, Professor Kim?
Yeah, so I think at this stage, the effect of tariff is going to be rather limited because it's not really yet in action except for like China or certain countries. But the expectation effect always matters. And clearly, there's a chance that this is going to hurt the economy because, the economics about tariff is very simple. It's just like a tax. So do you actually impose higher taxes when the economy is expected to be bad? Then I think most of the economists will say no, and it's going to basically not improving. So clearly they want to lower the taxes in many cases, right? So it's the same thing. So if for some other reasons, if the economy is expected to be bad, and why do you want to increase the tax? I think that's probably the idea here. Of course, in the long run, the idea of the current Trump administration's imposing tariffs actually may help the domestic industries because, obviously, if, you have alternatives and then if the consumers and the producers depend a lot on the imports, and now if you can actually buy domestic products, clearly that's going to improve the domestic economy. But if there are not many alternatives, in that case, clearly it's going to even hurt. And as we know, the U.S., the manufacturing structure is somewhat different from other countries in that, yes, they can build a lot of things on their own, but at the same time, they rely on imports because it's cheaper, and also they can use those things as intermediate goods to produce their final goods. So now if just, they impose tariffs, clearly this intermediate goods price is going to increase, and therefore their final goods are also going to be increasing. So even if they can divert completely to domestic producers, at the end of the day, you cannot dodge this type of the economic slowdown because of the cost push, inflation. So this basically can cause stagflation kind of things. Fast forward. So basically they just impose the tariffs, and then the other countries also put the retaliatory, the tariffs, then I think prices will keep increasing and the production costs increase, and then that's going to also slow down the productivity and the demand is going to decrease. Then that's going to be the worst case scenario. So clearly the administration can use this as a negotiation point, but I think it's going to be a bad idea to just keep imposing so that it's going to just increase the tax rates at the end of the day. And then I think that's definitely going to have more negative effect in the long term.
Right, definitely. So there are fears of a global economic downturn triggered by this tariff war. And amid this, reports suggest that the U.S. and China are pushing for a summit within the first half of the year. So if a U.S.-China summit takes place, could it open the door for easing tensions in tariffs and trade relations, Professor Oh?
Reasonably, I would say yes, it could. I don't need to touch on the credible threat of grenade game in game theory based upon the rationality condition. When you are just a business major or econ student, you may hear about the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act and the end of tariff war, which is a financial disaster and economic disaster, so-called Great Depression. Everybody knows about that. Economic battle based on competition policy cannot be a long-term because it is a painstaking game. Economic diplomacy or global partnership based on cooperation policy would be the long-term trade policy in normalcy because it is a gains-taking game. In 2018, the Trump administration began imposing tariff on Chinese import. Beijing punched back against Trump's sanction. In some way, U.S.-China trade tensions are even higher under Biden's export control designed to prevent China from acquiring advanced computer chips and the equipment. The United States and China are two global economic powers combined altogether. They produce much more than 40% of the world goods and services. So when Washington and Beijing keep going on economic battle, the rest of the world suffers on and on too. I believe both sides knows well about this when the two powers keep collision from the probability-wise stock market and financial market. Exactly the United States and China themselves would reflect the prolonged tension negatively on the price and risk exposure. So in this way, I may guess, hopes have risen that Washington and Beijing can cool down some of their economic tension, at least before the second half of this year.
Right, let's hope that could happen. Now, beyond the U.S.-China trade battle, Professor, the Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on all imported steel and aluminum starting March 12. And this is the first time South Korean steel products are directly subject to these tariffs. How significant is the expected impact on Korean companies?
Yes, it is true. But before talking about this, we have to know some numbers. The basic tariff rate of Korea on average is 8%. And the basic tariff rate of China is 3.6% on average. Now, think about it. 25% of tariff on all the products. It is a so horrible situation. As the Trump administration raised tariff on global steel and aluminum imports 25%, Beijing accused the United States of violating WTO rule, and allies of the United States, such as the European Union, responded also with criticism and reciprocal tariffs. Tariff against tariff. New tariffs were briefly expected to go even higher for Canada, the top U.S. export market. The EU announced a retaliatory tariff on $28 billion worth of a wide range of U.S. goods imported to Europe, such as boat, motorbikes, and even alcohol. Calling the new U.S. tariff unjustified, the European Commission said the levies would kick in on April 1st with additional countermeasures introduced mid-April. It will be exacerbated. Korea, the fourth largest steel exporter to the United States last year, accounting for 9% of all U.S. steel imports. It was also the third biggest aluminum exporter to the United States, comprising 4% of the U.S. aluminum imports. The first Trump administration waived tariff on Korean steel product in exchange for a yearly import of quota, 2.63 million tons, around 70% of Korea's average export volume. But as you mentioned this time, tariff measure abolished that quota. The United States, moreover, imposed a 25% import tariff on 259 steel and aluminum derivative products. Simply speaking, price competitiveness of U.S. steel products will strengthen. So they could absorb part of demand for Korean steel product. What matters is after the metal tariff, return of global protectionism and neo-mercantilism across the globe. The European Union announced countermeasures imposing tariff on U.S. goods. China vowed to take all necessary steps to safeguard its interests, while Japan's chief cabinet secretary expressed regret over the U.S. tariff. In the middle of it, the U.S. industry has slided in another tariff issue targeted for a Korean ban on import of U.S. beef for more than 30 minutes, and the agricultural quarantine system as unfair trade practice. As chain reaction, global trade barriers will become higher than ever, and the global trade market will be dwindled as time goes.
Right. Well, many people see this tariffs as a threat. Some people argue that the removal of the tariff-exempt quota system could actually present a new opportunity for Korean steelmakers as well. Professor Kim, how do you view this perspective?
Yeah, it's a little bit of unexpected, the deregulation, but in some sense, it eliminates the old style, the safety valve actually that allowed them to export a fixed amount duty-free. So I think this probably can just help the Korean steelmakers, especially if they either produce in the US or if they actually try to focus on the more expensive and then high quality, the steel items. So clearly, so you can actually just diversify the products actually, then that can actually increase the production and also the demand actually for these kind of things to be bought by the US. So clearly there's some room for that. Issue, I think, is probably the smaller steel makers, probably just who don't have any production facilities in the U.S. or in Mexico or other countries. So clearly, there could be some room for risk sharing among the steel makers, not just colluding or something, but I think in terms of sharing the product facilities and things like that. So there's a risk, but clearly there's some room for improvement. And at the end of the day, when there are regulations and more strict these type of the tariff policy in place, after 1 or 2 years, clearly the countries start finding, and the importers of the U.S. also start finding loopholes and then ways to get over this type of problems. In that sense, I think this type of the deregulation actually can have some positive impacts actually as well.
Well, that's certainly good to hear. Now, Professor Kim, away from steels, President Trump has reaffirmed his plan to impose reciprocal tariffs on individual countries set to take effect on April 2nd. So if South Korea is included, what products could be targeted and what kind of tariff rates could we speculate?
This is still up in the air, so it's somewhat difficult. But I think, as Professor Oh mentioned, clearly the U.S. started talking about the beefs, the age over 30 months. And this was, if I remember correctly, I think was a result of these, the mad cow disease actually concerns and things like that. And clearly this type of things is negotiable. So clearly they'll try to impose this taxes, tariffs, or at least just push more lenient policy for importing these type of the products. So I think clearly that can actually have issues. And also as a return for that, if the South Korea does not allow this type of the things to be imported, then clearly they can push the higher tariff rate, at least initially. So clearly, if the South Korea actually has tariffs, then clearly I think it's going to be related to electronics, clearly, and also the semiconductors, steel, aluminum, and so these cars, and these will be the major items. And depending on so far what the Trump administration has been doing, then I think between 10%, 25% will be the most likely numbers, depending on the how important these things are to South Korea. So they'll try to be strategic. I expect that some of the items U.S. also is keen on or concerned about, so their demand elasticity is very low, then I think they'll probably try to push lower tariff rates. So I think the semiconductors probably 5% range. For the cars and other things where the U.S. also has some competitive edge, there's a chance that they'll try to put 25% tariffs. Issue is this U.S. and South Korea have free trade agreements. So I think that's definitely it's something to be negotiable, I believe, overall.
Right, so we'll have to see how discussions move through. Now, aside from the reciprocal tariffs, the Trump administration plans to impose 25% tariffs on automobiles, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals, also starting April 2nd. Now, with Trump also hinting at a possible repeal of the CHIPS Act, there's concerns about South Korea's semiconductor industry as well. Professor Oh, what's negotiation strategies could or should South Korea pursue in response to this?
To be honest, not much instruments is left, but Trump has insisted that tariff will help revive domestic manufacturing and cut U.S. trade deficit. In brief, I may add to comment till now, what has been done is a tariff war against China. And what is to come is a war against the EU. When it comes to tariff war between the two, semi-truck and passenger car have been at the bone of contention till now. Trump has long railed against the unfair treatment of U.S. car exporters in foreign markets. The U.S. market is the largest destination for automakers, and the EU has a $50 billion US dollar worth of trade surplus with the United States. EU collect a 10% duty on vehicle import, 4 times the U.S. passenger car tariff rate of 2.5%. The U.S. Though collect a 25% tariff on pickup trucks from countries other than Mexico or Canada, a tax that make a vehicle highly profitable for Detroit automakers. The tariffs are expected to deal a blow to Korean companies that have been exporting to the U.S. without tariff after entering Mexico, which has low production costs than the U.S. companies. Currently, more than 400 Korean companies, including Samsung Electronics, LG Electronics, Kia, and Hyundai Mobis, have production bases in Mexico. In relation to semiconductor industry, it is very, very entangled with a lot of more complex dynamics of IRA, CHIPS Act, and other subsidy and incentives from the state government level involved, not to mention of the federal level. So they might be need time to analyze the substantial effect. So it will be at the next level of more aggressive attack, which will be a tougher stuff for a Korean company. Job creation by reforming supply chain and logistic channel in the U.S. could be used as a leverage. We could get a hint when asked about tariff on chips. Trump himself answered, it will be 25% and higher, and it will go very substantially higher over the course of the year. But we want to give them time to come in. So it will take time.
Right. So with a lot of things happening, reciprocal tariffs set to take effect soon, and it remains to be seen whether more negotiations can, prevent further tariffs, or if new countermeasures will need to be implemented. We'll have to continue to monitor these developments, but as of now, we will have to wrap up our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Kim and Professor Oh. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.